what's up and welcome back to the channel. So tonight we are going to take a look at two cartridges that have been very divisive in the shooting community. Both of those cartridges being the 308 Winchester and the 6.5 Creedmoor. So I'm a data-driven shooter. I've had tens of thousands of rounds behind both of these cartridges. I shoot them both past 1,000 yards. I've harvested game with both of them. And I really want to have an objective, educational, and professional discussion on both of these. At the end of the day, to be honest, both of these cartridges are going to serve you well. You're not going to be at a severe disadvantage if you're shooting one versus the other. But again, I really want to dive down in because I geek out on some of these numbers and kind of how these rounds perform on paper and in the field as well. But again, just dive down into how these rounds perform and give a good objective reasoning on if I were to only select one, which would I select? Alright, so let's take a quick up close look at both of these cartridges. So you could probably already tell by the bullet diameter, but we have the 6.5 Creedmoor here on your right and the 308 Winchester here on your left. Now we'll work from the base of the cartridge up, and the first thing I want to mention is both of these cartridges operate off the same case head diameter. That means they use the same bolt face, so if you want to swap from 308 Winchester and go to 6.5 Creedmoor or vice versa, the only thing you need to change out is the barrel. They use the same magazines, they use the same rifle components, everything like that, so it's a really easy swap going between the two cartridges. One thing I will mention on the 6.5 Creedmoor though is you may need a high pressure bolt. Just since this cartridge operates at a little bit higher pressures than the 308 Winchester, on a high pressure bolt, essentially the tolerances are tighter between the firing pin and the firing pin hole on the face of the bolt. This just kind of reduces primer flow back into that firing pin hole. So that's something that you don't want. Just a heads up, if you go from 308 to 6.5 Creedmoor, you may want to look into a high pressure bolt. So kind of moving up into the body of the cases, I don't know if you can see, but the 308 Winchester is a little bit more tapered than the 6.5 Creedmoor, but it really gets more noticeable when you look at the shoulder angle right here. So the 308 Winchester has a more obtuse 20-degree shoulder angle, where the 6.5 Creedmoor has a more acute 30-degree shoulder angle. So what does this mean? So the 308 Winchester feeds a little bit better. It was designed to have good feeding in machine guns, etc., stuff like that. That's not to say the 6.5 Creedmoor doesn't feed well, but has a lot of benefits with a 30-degree shoulder. First, the case doesn't stretch as much. Second of all, the cartridge, since the shoulder is blown out ever so slightly, you can fit a little bit more powder in here than you can if it had a 20-degree shoulder. So lastly, let's take a look at the bullet section of both of these cartridges. Now it's important to mention that both of these were designed to shoot at magazine length out of short action rifles or an AR-10 platform rifle. So in the heavier flavor of bullets, you're going to have a case overall length of around 2.8 inches. Now if you look really close, this is where the 6.5 really stands apart from the 308 Winchester. You can see it has a ton more space here to seat a very, very long high BC seek and ogive bullet compared to the 308. This is something that kind of plagued the 260 Remington, which is essentially a 6.5-08. So essentially a necked down 308 to 6.5. And if you shot one of these really, really long high BC 6.5 bullets, essentially what would happen if you sat it to 2.8 inches case overall length, you would seat the ogive of the bullet below the case neck here. And that's something that you really wouldn't want. So again, the 6.5 Creedmoor was just designed to seat these long high BC bullets out a little bit further compared to the 308. Alright, so before we jump down the rabbit hole of ballistics, I want to touch base on history real quick. And this kind of plays to the first talking point in 308 versus 6.5 because I hear it all the time. Now y'all are probably all familiar with this cartridge here. This is the 30-06 Springfield. So it's a 30 caliber cartridge invented in 1906. It's been around forever. It's easily one of America's most popular cartridges. It used to be our old military cartridge, and it's one of the most popular hunting cartridges. The reason why I bring that up is because 308 is kind of the successor or the kind of the short action version of the 30-06 in a vague sense. So the biggest debate that I hear is 308 has been around since the 1950s, right? It's been working fine for our military and hunting for 70 years. There's absolutely no reason to change to 6.5 Creedmoor, which has been around since 2007, right? Now, we'll get into that in a sec, but one thing that I kind of like, my mindset and an idea that I subscribe to is if you aren't moving forward, you're standing still. So this is an exaggerated example, but I like to think of our forefathers, right? They were shooting black powder muskets, and they won the revolution. They've been harvesting game with black powder muskets for a while, but if they sat down and said, well, these rifles won the revolution for us, they've harvested game just fine for us, there's no need to even think about another cartridge. We wouldn't have modern cartridges like any of these on the table today. And while that's a completely exaggerated example, that's kind of the mindset that I subscribe to. I don't want that to get confused with you need to jump on the first Wildcat that comes out. However, back to these cartridges here, the 6.5 Creedmoor has been around since 2007. It's starting to see military use. It's extremely popular. It's very available on the stores. So I'm just kind of confused. I don't understand the argument 100% of this cartridge has been doing this for 70 years. There's no need to go to another one. The 6.5 diameter cartridge is nothing new. A lot of people think that the 6.5 Creedmoor and 6.5 started becoming popular in 2007. What they forget about is 6.5 by 55 Swede, and that's been around since the 1890s. It's a very, very popular hunting cartridge, target shooting cartridge over in Europe, and it was even used to harvest elephants. So when you hear a lot of people speak on the 6.5 Creedmoor as like shooting a BB gun at an animal, and the 308 is like shooting a death ray at an animal, and we'll kind of get into this in a little bit in the next sections here. But understand that the 6.5 by 55 and understand 308 is 7.62 by 51. Know that 6.5 by 55 is around the general class as 308. It has been absolutely hammering animals since the late 1800s, even elephants, and elephants aren't small animals. So again, I just wanted to kind of paint a picture of that timeline for you, that the 6.5, even though the Creedmoor has been around since 2007, 6.5 flavor cartridges have been around since the late 1800s. So let's jump into the ballistics of both of these cartridges, and we're going to look and measure these on 3 different metrics. So we're going to look at BC, or ballistic coefficient. We're going to look at sectional density, or SD, and we're also going to kind of look at the different flavors, different bullet weights, different bullet profiles that both of these cartridges support. So before we jump into it, I think that it's important to kind of understand what these mean. So ballistic coefficient is essentially a drag measurement. It measures how efficiently a bullet flies through the air. It measures how well it deflects wind, and so on and so forth. So a higher BC bullet flies through the air more efficiently than a lower BC bullet. There's also 2 ways to measure BC. There's a G1 drag coefficient, and there's also a G7 drag coefficient. And how these are measured is a G1 is more or less for your kind of flat base bullets, and a G7 is more or less for your long boat tail bullets, kind of your target shooting bullets. Anyways, I digress to sectional density, or SD. And this is essentially a measurement of mass at a cross section of the bullet. So it's essentially kind of how well the bullet penetrates, and it's an important factor or metric to take note of. Maybe when you're hunting, when you're looking at bullet penetration, whether you're shooting a light-skinned or heavier-skinned animal. And then last but not least, we're just going to look at all the different bullet weights and profiles. So before we jump into it, we're going to be taking a look at the Hornady manual. I've got a Lyman manual, a Nosler manual. You can look at Berger manuals, so on and so forth. But we're kind of going to take a look with a broad brushstroke here. All the other bullets made by all the different manufacturers will probably have similar ballistics, but kind of essentially in the same category. So first thing first, we're going to take a look at the 6.5 Creedmoor, and we're going to look at the 140 class of bullets. I think that's a good heavy per caliber bullet that people use for target shooting and hunting. And then for the 308, we're going to be looking at the 168 grain to 175 grain flavor of bullets. That's a very popular bullet for target shooters, and some hunters use 168 grain bullets as well. So first things first, let's just take a look at just numerical values of ballistic coefficient. and we'll take a look at our G7 number. And one of the more popular target shooting loads for 6.5 Creedmoor or target shooting bullets is the 140 grain ELD match. And the G7 ballistic coefficient for this cartridge or this projectile is 0.326. So again, remember, the higher the number, the more efficient the bullet is flying through the air. So it's at 0.326. 168 grain ELD match bullet in the 30 cal flavor, the G7 ballistic coefficient of that is 0.263. So we can already tell off the bat that the 6.5 Creedmoor 140 grain bullet flies much more efficiently and deflects wind much more efficiently than its 30 caliber counterpart. One thing to mention if we're talking about hunting as well is sectional density. Sectional density is important to note, again, like we said, for penetration, but if you look at this in the kind of class of the 140 grain class of bullets, our sectional density is 0.287 to 0.293, so it's a pretty good sectional density. Once you move up to the 30 caliber bullets, you get a sectional density of 0.248 to 0.253. So we could tell just based off of Doppler verified ballistic coefficients, as well as the mass of the cross section of the bullets, the 6.5 Creedmoor flies better, it deflects wind better, and also can penetrate deeper, granted that you're using the same bullet. In a long range or a target shooting scenario, a higher BC means that even if you have high winds or you make a bad shot or you pull a shot ever so slightly, the bullet will be less affected by the environment when it's traveling downrange, so you have a better chance of environmental factors pushing your bullet off of your target. In terms of hunting, this means a lot as well because and we'll get into energy in our next sections, but accuracy and shot placement is very important when you're harvesting animals. I don't want to get into a sportsman-like conversation of, hey, if you aren't comfortable with the shot, don't take it. We won't go there. However, if you do need to make a shot on an animal that's a little bit further than maybe your normal engagement distances, and you need to have proper shot placement, the 6.5 Creedmoor is going to be much easier to place your shot where you want it without environmental errors pushing your shot out of the vital zone radius of the animal. So another metric that's important to look at other than SD and BC is going to be velocity. And we're just going to look at book values again. Your mileage may vary, but out of a 24-inch barrel for a 6.5 Creedmoor shooting around 140 grain bullet, max velocities are looking about 27 to 2750. Again, that's book velocity. Moving over to the 168 grain bullet in the 30 caliber flavor out of the 308, our velocities are going to be about 2,600 feet per second. So it's important to know that you can get measurably more velocity out of the 6.5 Creedmoor than you can out of the 308. And this is important when the bullet is flying downrange. It actually has less time in flight than the 308, so that's less time in the air to be affected by environmental factors. So that kind of just contributes to the practical accuracy of the 6.5 Creedmoor and the ability to deliver accurate fire. Now, one thing that interests me a lot is taking a look back at the ballistic coefficient. We'll look at the G7 again of 326 of the 140 grain 6.5 Creedmoor. The 308 counterpart to meet that ballistic coefficient is going to be, like we said again, the 168 grain was only 0.263, so that's fairly low. We have to go all the way up to 220 grain match bullets to get a 0.329 ballistic coefficient, or 0.329 G7 ballistic coefficient. And I actually shoot that same bullet out of my 300 Winchester Magnum. And it's important to note is these BCs are Doppler verified at Mach 2.25 or 2.25, and I think that velocity is maybe 2,500 feet per second or just over 2,500 feet per second if my math serves me right. So I think that it's really cool that the 6.5 Creedmoor can achieve similar ballistics or similar trajectories as a 300 Winchester Magnum with a short action standard bolt face compared to a long action Magnum 30 cal cartridge. Granted, energy is going to be completely different downrange, but again, I just think that that's really cool that the 6.5 Creedmoor is able to achieve a similar trajectory. Alright, so we have a few final categories to wrap this up. And next I wanted to talk about energy and energy retention. Now, without going into all the different mathematical equations to calculate energy for your specific bullet, weight, velocity, so on and so forth, I'm going to kind of take this as a generalized overview, right? So generally speaking, the 308 has a slight edge on the 6.5 Creedmoor when it comes to delivering energy on target to about 300 to 350 yards. Once you pass that 350 yard mark, the 308 will start tapering off and the 6.5 Creedmoor starts to shine in terms of retaining energy at distance. At distance is where energy retention really matters, right? So both of these cartridges deliver appropriate amounts of energy until that 350 yard mark. But when you're at distance, when energy retention is at a premium, the 6.5 Creedmoor really takes off compared to the 308. Moving down the list, we need to take a look at recoil as well. The 6.5 Creedmoor has about 30% less recoil than the 308. And this really helps in terms of mitigating your natural flinch response a little bit. You know, everyone has one. So when you're shooting, it kind of helps that you know the rifle isn't going to kick you as hard. Not to say that these cartridges have a ton of recoil, but it is important to mention that the 6.5 has less than the 308. On top of this, it's a lot easier to spot your shots, spot your trace, spot your splash when you're shooting the 6.5 over the 308. So again, in terms of recoil, the 6.5 is going to take it. I wanted to touch base on barrel length and barrel life. So generally speaking, the 6.5 Creedmoor shines because of its velocity. That's kind of how it gets all of the pros, in my opinion. So to get the velocity to be able to shoot out a distance, you need a little bit longer barrel length than 308. So I would say if you're shooting an AR and you're going to go with a barrel length over 16 inches, I would go with the 6.5 Creedmoor. I have an 18-inch 6.5 Creedmoor. I shoot out to 1,000 yards all the time, and it's awesome. But if you want a 14.5-inch pinned and weld, or a 13.9 pinned and weld, or maybe a 16-inch gun, that's kind of getting on the cusp of the velocity in terms of 6.5 Creedmoor. So if it were me, I would probably look at the 308 for 16 inches and under. But that's just my personal opinion. Leave it up to however you want to build your rifle. Moving into barrel life though, the 308 Winchester, if all factors were equal in terms of volume of fire, time between shots, so on and so forth, the 308 Winchester is going to have a little bit longer barrel life than the 6.5. That is not to say that the 6.5 does not have good barrel life. People think when they buy a barrel on a rifle, it should last forever. But I try and kind of get the mindset of barrels on rifles are like tires on cars, if that makes sense. So over time, you know, when you drive your vehicle, your tires are going to wear out. Just when you shoot your guns, your barrels are going to wear out. That the analogy kind of continues is if you do burnouts in your car all day, your tires are going to wear down much faster, just like if you do mag dumps after mag dumps after mag dumps on your rifle. So again, all else equal, 308 has a little bit longer barrel life than 6.5, but that's not to say that 6.5 does not have a long barrel life. I mean, there's plenty of people that get 2,500, 3,000 rounds, maybe more out of that, where people are getting, 4,500, 5,000 rounds out of 308. So that's up for you to balance, but at the end of the day, I mean, how many people are really blowing through 3,000, 3,500 rounds that often? You can really make a 6.5 barrel stretch out unless you're a very serious competitor and you're swapping barrels every single season or burning through your barrel every season. So take that as what you will, but barrel life is going to go to the 308. And then last but not least is going to be availability. Just like we touched on earlier, 308s are military cartridge. However, 6.5 Creedmoor is seeing military use. Both of these are plenty available on the store shelves. Granted, we live in kind of uncertain times, if you will. You could go to the store and ammunition is fairly scarce. However, 6.5 Creedmoor is not unavailable. You can find it online. You can go to Academy, you can go to Bass Pro, Cabela's, Gander Mountain, you name it, and this cartridge is available. It's not a Wildcat. You're not going to have to hand load for it. So I would say availability is equal between the two. The 308 is used more in terms of military, etc., but the 6.5 Creedmoor has plenty of loadings and is, like we said, it's available on the store, or in the store. So if I could only have one, I would have to go for the 6.5 Creedmoor. Looking through everything again, the 6.5 Creedmoor overshadows or outshadows the 308 when it comes to ballistic coefficient. It has a higher sectional density. It has higher energy retention at distance. It has less recoil. The barrel life isn't bad, and it's an available cartridge, even though I reload a lot. So this was a long video. I really, really appreciate you making through it if you did. If you wouldn't mind, let's have a conversation down below. Let me know in the comments what you choose and why. But like I said, for me, I think my cartridge is definitely going to have to go to the 6.5 Creedmoor. Anyways, I appreciate all of y'all. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog I said hi. We'll see you in the next one.